Welcome to another video. In this video we'll be looking at this Farish Class 91, or known as the Intercity 225. Now generally speaking this is in real nice shape. I do have a soft spot for these Locos. What's wrong with this one though, it is the motor. So I'll show you how to change that out. And in fact, whilst I've got you here, this is the old motor. So I'm filming this prior to the video, or after the video, and that's what's broken on the old motor. Okay, that's why I'm changing it. it's torn a few wires and things, so it's knackered. And also later on in this video I'll show you how I 3D printed these front spats, or modelled them. It's relatively a simple-ish thing to do, and I know sometimes they can just sort of break, so that's why I've modelled them and printed some. So stay tuned. And let's just get on with the video, shall we? Okay, so first things first, what you want to do is get the shell off your Loco in order to get access to the motor. So on most shells you just lift up either side of the body, lifting it away from the body, and it just come off just like that. This is mainly for the Poole type chassis, as this is. Now I'm interested in the motor, so I need to get that out, and the easiest way, or the only way, is to take off both ends. So I've got a flat-headed countersunk screw, and that lifts off with that end cap there, and the bogies come out. I'm just checking that the gears move freely at this point to make sure that they don't need any attention later on, because now is a good time to find out any other issues that you have. So we'll just carry on with the other end of the chassis. And might as well check this bogie as well, make sure that it's alright. Yep, spins freely, good. So all them bits are orientated so that they are in relation to the chassis that I'm holding. Now the next thing to take off will be the motor side plates and magnet. Now I use a pen here, and I just mark a line from the front and to the side, so that everything there can only be put back on one way. So sometimes if you put a magnet on backwards, it can not make your motor run. So we take them bits off, magnet just lifts out, some are glued in. If the magnet wants to stay there, just leave it there, just take it out just so it's not in my way. But generally speaking, most of those bits should lift out. Now the next thing is to basically release the bottom of the chassis. Now there's 4 screws, flat-headed screws again. Now just take your time here, because they screw into little free-floating nuts which are in the chassis. Now I'm trying to keep this thing upside down for every single screw that I undo here, so that the nuts don't wander off. You'll see what I mean in a second. Just take your time with the whole thing, really. There's still 1 or 2 threads need to come out there, and the whole thing should lift off. Now, I don't know if you saw that, but the brush for the motor just fell out, which is going to go back in. So I wasn't too worried about that. This is just the quickest way to get into the Loco. Now there's a spring there, and in my case it didn't want to come out that side. I had to take it out this side, so in hindsight I should have probably taken it out before separating the chassis. But it doesn't really matter which way around you do it, because everything's got to be pulled apart and then put back together anyway, so as long as you don't lose anything, you're golden. You don't have to take this bushing out either, but I tend to give it a bit of a clean. So I'm just putting the screws back in that plastic piece so I don't lose their orientation, and then I put that brush to one side. It should be going about there, and hopefully you can just see the see, I'm looking at the motor here, seeing how am I going to get it out. You have to align the teeth on those cups on the drivetrain so that it will slide up and out, This motor was extremely tight in there, almost like it had been sort of rammed in there at some point, and that might have been why it got damaged. Maybe, maybe not. So we've got one end out, lovely. And they just slot in, but those drive cups either end, you do have to make sure that they're not like turn 90 degrees, otherwise they just won't come out and you might end up breaking something. So got to be wary as well. I've just lifted that up. Now there's a spring and a bush or brush underneath it. So they've gone somewhere. But that's our new motor we're going to put in. Put the old one to one side. That should be, yeah, there she is. That's our brush. We'll clean that later and put that back in. And again, this spring didn't want to come out that end because at some point someone's had this apart and squashed the spring sideways, so it kind of goes in this end and out that end. It won't go out the other end, if that makes sense. It's okay, they still work just fine. It's just how it is. And I'm not going to change them. I'll just make sure that they're clean when I put it all back together. Because the last thing you want is oil going on a nice clean oil-free motor. So I'm just giving this a bit of a wipe with isopropyl alcohol. It's not needed, but I find that if there's any residual oil in the area, it tends to make its way onto the motor. You spend your time with this. I had a motor core which had the bearing blocks and the cups attached to it already from other like donor Locos and things, so it's just a quick swap for me. Now there's various, you can take those plastic pieces off the motor that you just had and use a new armature. In fact, even better, so you're probably better off just putting a coreless motor in at this point. I don't know how easy it is to get these motors now. I've not had to buy one, but you could try Farish and spares, or you could try Peter's spares, and just see if they've got anything. I think the 5-pole motors have got a bit more torque than the 3-pole motors, so maybe that'll help you out. Now this was being a bit of a troublesome thing, trying to get it back in its hole. So I was pushing down there, you see on the shaft, it took a lot of force to push that in. Which you don't really, it's worrying when you've got that, but as long as when everything's in and home and it returns freely, you're onto a winner. So it was a little bit tight there. I was thinking, oh, what's going on? And onto the left, under my finger there on the left, there was a bearing block, ever so slightly just proud, which wasn't on the motor. Let's see. It is the one sort of in the middle on the left hand side. I'll push it down in a second. Oh, we've got a loose nut, look, see, it's just come outside the chassis. So before we attend to the drivetrain issue, I'm just going to use the magnet from the motor, take the nuts out. They don't always want to come out, so just sort of leave them. You could probably put tape over them, to be honest, just so that they stay in their hole. Yeah, so anyway, let's get back to this drivetrain. What's making it not want to turn properly? It's that bearing block right there, look. Just make sure they're all in home. There we go. Lovely and free now. If you've got any issues at this point, you need to address what that issue could be. If you don't, you've just sealed it in for good, really, when you put it all back together, and you just have to take it all apart again. So you want to make sure everything's good at this point. That's pretty much it. So I'm going to call that. Now that we haven't got a spring or a brush or anything loose, basically I'm going to put this together. It's just a case of screwing it back down. Notice I started on the one that's got a nut left in the chassis block, and throughout this whole process I've not spun the chassis around or anything like that, so that the parts to the left are for the left hand side, parts on the right for the right hand side. And the nuts there, they just slide in. I've got my thumb on it just there, so it keeps the flat side of the nut facing outboard on the chassis. Sometimes on some shells if the nut's got like the pointy bit of like the nut pointing out, it's too much, like on a class 20, it will actually stop the shell going on the Loco. So there we are, just keeping the nut flat with my nail again. Tighten that up. And on this, the screws underneath there's two countersunk ones and there's two flat-headed ones. I say flat-headed, flat-headed heads. So if you dropped all your screws everywhere, you can still work out which ones go where, because the countersunk holes on the plastic will be for the countersunk screws. I'm not doing them up dead tight either. It's just enough to like, when the screw stops, I stop. I don't like pinch them a little bit more, because over time that pressure builds up and it can crack plastic. So this is the order in which I put the brushes back in the motor. So that's actually like a brass bush, which is basically a cylinder which holds all the guts. Now we've got a brush here, and you want the nipple side going towards the spring. So I get it started. Oh, that one's just gone in the hole, look. Great, that's good. So the spring will just sit over that nipple basically. Now what you can do is get yourself a knife blade. I find this is the easiest way, except you're kind of, so you squash the whole thing down in the hole. You just don't want to slip and cut yourself here. So the idea is then you slide that piece over whilst the knife blade's holding the spring down. This takes a bit of practice. I don't always get it right first time, but it's, you know, something more or less like that. Okay, so that's all in there now. You know, if you're doing this, you probably want to buy yourself new brushes and springs. You know, all the new bits. It's not necessarily needed though. So there's still loads of life left in these brushes. I mean, it's probably had a whole lifetime anyway. So, fortunately, I think the motor probably just got a little bit too hot, and it failed the commutator section. Now the previous owner did change the gears on this, so chances are there were gear issues before, and chances are those gear issues before caused the motor to knacker itself basically. Because heat, if you get too much heat in something, it can really mess it up. So that's the top and the bottom side of the brushes done. And so we've got the brushes in. So the reassembly of the Loco, this is the way I do it. Put the magnet back in so the pen marks match up, and here's one pole of the magnet there on that blade. Check the motor if it spins freely and doesn't catch on that blade. Now the next one, there is a little hole just in there that the point of this sits in, and there you go, it's on. So that's the motor together. Check it all spins freely and it doesn't bind up at all. Next thing, I'm going to go for a bogey and just slot it in like that. And the end cap and the countersunk screw. And again with these screws, I just do it until the screw stops. I don't try and like wind it all the way like till high heaven. Just when it stops, it stops. Check the bogey moves freely and just basically do the same on the other side. Notice though, we haven't got the spats on that front bogey. They kind of snapped off, which is unfortunate, but fortunately I printed some, so I'll give you a quick little spiel on the modelling side of it in a second. But at this point we want to see if it works on our track. Well, this is the test and looks like it's pretty happy. It's working pretty good. So I tend to do like a slow and a fast sort of movements. Bit of both, you know. And then I'll run it in a bit. But that to me is a lot healthier than it was. Okay, so the next thing is literally put the shell on. Yeah. So it needs to click into place, so I just took it off screen to click it. just like that. Now what's been bugging me, you saw it at the beginning, is I haven't got any spats on the front here. Well, I've got one, but I haven't got the other one, so that's really quite annoying. So I thought it was a good idea to try and print them. So in the next bit that I'm going to show you, it's just a bit of modelling really. Okay, so this is what I basically modelled for the spats on the front of the 225. I'm using a program called Fusion 360. I made one and I basically just mirrored it, and that's how you come up with two symmetrically opposed to each other, which is great. And I just wanted to show you this bit really, because in previous videos I showed you how I basically do the modelling. So just make a block and basically carve it away until you get the shape you want. But in this bit here, I basically render it. So I'm just trying to select white, like paint glossy white, something like that. And I didn't realise Fusion did this until quite recently actually. And it's really quite a cool thing to do, to see what your model would look like in the real world with a bit of light on it and stuff. So we'll just fast forward here 1 second. And this is it rendered. So I was quite happy with how this turned out, and naturally I guess the next thing to do was to print it. So every time you move the mouse on the render, it basically resets and it will start to like load it up again. But hopefully you can get an idea there of what it looks like, and hopefully what it will look like when it's printed. So you don't have to do this. I just thought, oh, that looks pretty cool. You know, because it's quite late at night and I couldn't actually, you know, go and use my printer. So I was just like, oh, I'll have a little look at it. So yeah, next thing, really, I'm not going to show you this, but I go and print it the next day and give it a quick airbrush with white paint. And the next bit I'll show you will be them ready to go on the Loco, pretty much. So here we are, the Loco and newly printed Spat. They came out great. I printed them with white resin, but when you cure them, they sort of tan, they go golden brown, like you're cooking them, which you kind of are. So I airbrushed them white, and more or less, it's a direct fit. It just goes in the holes, and jobs are good in. So it needs pushing in a little bit more, and I need to put one on the other side. But yeah, that's it. Work a treat. If you are after any of those, give me a shout. Because I printed a few of them, but I don't know, they're a bit fiddly to make. But I just struggled to get a hold of some new ones, so I just made some, as you do. Another reason to get a 3D printer, I guess. So pretty happy with that. The next thing I'll do is I'll just mop it down with a bit of soapy water and clean it all off. And I think that's it then. We'll just run it around the track and enjoy it.